My name is Josh Holliday. I'm the placemaking manager for the Lansing Economic Area Partnership LEAP. We're the regional economic development agency here in the Lansing area. And I'm privileged to be with some wonderful placemaking practitioners today to have a conversation about something that I feel like I do pretty frequently here in the region, because we're building relationships with municipalities and connecting them with the private sector, the nonprofit sector, artists, creatives, individuals, residents of our community, and oftentimes we have to find a point in the middle to meet. And in placemaking, that's so critical to our ability to be effective in this conversation. We have creatives that have great ideas and they have initiatives that they want to accomplish, and we have municipalities that have policies, procedures, different elected officials and different ideas from their residents. And so there has to be a point in the middle that projects can flourish. There has to be a point where we can each come together and talk about how a project's possible, because we're going to change this. I'm going to revise my idea. We're going to look at a policy or a procedure. We're going to look at our strategic plan and our long-range planning. And so today, I'm really excited to be with some wonderful folks that are on both sides of that perspective, but this is a really positive conversation we're going to have today about how we meet in the middle, because there are not sides that they're on necessarily. So we'll start over here with Tom.
Hey, I'm Tom Fehrenbach. I'm the Community and Economic Development Administrator for the City of East Lansing. I do not have the coolest title in the city, nor did I get to choose my own title. But I'm delighted to be here, and I guess I'm the bureaucrat on the panel today.
Yay. I'm Marty Pottinger, theater artist, an activist, director of Art at Work and Terremoto Inc., AKA.
I'm Kimberly Rodriguez, and we have way better chairs than the last group, so thank you to whoever made that happen. I own Step in Time Dance Studio in Nashville, Michigan. There is a Nashville. There's actually 9, but we're the coolest. Yeah, and it's 15 years old this year, and I'm really excited to be here. I work a lot in our community. I don't just run my business day to day. I'm a part of the Arts Council, I'm a part of the Chamber of Commerce, and I'm also a part of our really awesome Nashville Route 66 Business District that's done some amazing things to put our town back on the map.
Hello, my name is Kirk Rea. I am a co-executive director of a nonprofit in Portland, Oregon called the City Repair Project, and we help communities to do mostly projects in the right-of-way, in the public sphere, from murals to natural buildings to ecological landscaping.
Fantastic. Thank you all for being here today. Kimberly, let's start with you. You're an artist, a creative entrepreneur that's doing incredible work in your community, but building relationships with the municipalities are oftentimes a great first step in trying to meet in the middle. Talk to us a little bit about how you've done that in Nashville and why that's important to you.
So in Nashville, I've learned that to build the relationships with the municipalities, it's really hard. Our city council has been around a really long time, and that's amazing. But there's a lot of projects that we want to do that we don't know from our business owners' standpoints, all the ins and outs that you have to do. So instead of us trying to figure it out, instead of us having to go to the city council and have them have to go through their red tape, we found that it's a lot easier for us to make relationships with people like our DPW and our head of the Department of Public Works. And we start there. So we ask him what zoning needs to be done, what do we need to do to shut down this road, because Nashville's right on M66 highway. So anytime we want to do anything, we have to contact MDOT. It's required. So he's going to have to contact MDOT anyways. So we just go directly to our Department of Public Works chair, and he's in all of our business meetings. He's at the table. We bring him to the table first and foremost. Before we do a project that's going to affect how traffic flows, or if we need to shut it down for a parade, we just go to him first.
In Kirk, you're also on the creative side of implementing these projects. In city repairs methodologies and the ways in which you've approached the relationship building and implementing projects has evolved over time a little bit. Tell us a little bit about where City Repair started with, maybe do and ask for forgiveness, to then where you are now and how you've become a little more sophisticated.
Sure. So City Repair began in Portland around 1996 when a group of neighbors decided that they wanted to influence the look of their neighborhood. They wanted more art. They wanted more gathering place. And through a lot of numerous community meetings, they figured out that they could all agree on a street painting at an intersection, and this would mimic a piazza or a plaza, and also putting in more community-oriented infrastructure like benches and little free libraries, children play zones, putting in plants in the parking strips, the land between the street and the sidewalk. And when the community, they went through their process, they made a design, gave it to the city, and the city said, no, like, who are you to do this? We're the professionals, we're the deciders, go back home. And the community went back home, but they decided to go forward without permission. And they painted the first intersection painting in Portland, Oregon, breaking the law. And when the city officials came and the police, and they saw, the smallest of us to, the youngest of us to the oldest of us out participating, all painting together, dancing around, the city started to see the value of the beauty of the aesthetics, but also, and most importantly to us, the beauty of the relationship building of coming out together and painting these. So they, turned their mind, they made this process legal and permittable. And since then, we may have also broken some other laws as we've been helping communities go for their vision. But over time, we've built more proactive relationships with the different bureaus that we interface with and are able to work out getting a code or getting a permit for something that may not have been done before, and especially with a lot of sustainability-oriented technologies like natural building, using gray water, that just has not been a part of the American urban setting. And we've built up good relationships and showed good practice, and now it's to the point where the city's just making these practices more and more accessible. So some of these installations no longer even require folks to fill out a physical permit. So to do a community installation under 3 feet, such as a bench, a poetry post, a little free library, they're automatically permitted by the city. They don't cost the community anything. So now we have quite a bit different relationship.
Yeah, and I think that is a great evolution of how the community came together to embrace and support the work of creatives in your community to make an impact through creative placemaking. And going over to Tom, talk about from your perspective in the city of East Lansing why you've been working with municipalities for quite some time in your career. Why is it important to embrace the work of creative entrepreneurs and artists to do these projects, and what benefits do those have on the community?
Sure. Well, first of all, I would not advocate for breaking the law. No. I think it's much more productive, actually, to start with the relationship building with the folks like me who kind of understand the rules and make a career out of helping folks navigate through our processes, keeping people safe, and also making sure we're inclusive of folks and thinking about things like accessibility and those types of issues when we're planning anything. But back to the why, I think it's because people want to live in cool places, and ultimately that's connected to everything else. In fact, when we walked in today, the first thing that happened today was that song, and I want to quote Jose because he really captured it. The reason we do this stuff and the reason people live in cities, and kind of going all the way back to the Agora and why people want to live in close proximity to each other and why we want to activate spaces. So I'm going to read his quote, which is, Being where I live needs to mean more than a practical decision, but where I'm living, where I'm growing, where I'm engaging, where I'm connecting, where I'm contributing, where I'm selling, where I'm embracing, where I'm buying, and where I'm raising the bar high, the kids well, and the city up. And that's really what it's all about, I think.
Absolutely.
So thanks, Jose. I think he's over there somewhere.
Well, thanks, Tom. And Marty, I would kind of describe you as the queen of matchmakers between municipalities and artists. You clearly know like the secret sauce that's necessary to connect the artists with the municipality or these community organizations. How does that work, and what is that secret sauce?
Okay, well, we all know I'm not the queen. We all know who the queen is. That said, what y'all have said is good. That's great. I appreciate it. We had two great conversations, or 1.5, before we got on the phone, and they were particularly rich. I think I'm watching documentaries about actual monkeys and chimpanzees and all that to try to understand my fellow creatures better, and it's helping. And it just makes it more simple. It's like, oh, I get it now. But I think, how do you get to yes, and how do you craft a yes question is how I think about it. And so do you start out, after you've done the listening, after you've done some of the relationship building, how small of a yes, can you start with? What could they say yes to? And really, you've built the relationship so you have a sense of what they're up against, whoever you're dealing with. And I think, and they feel they at least partially trust you or actually trust you. And so I think, and I know I start out by asking, this was with the police, but with anyone, you go around and I just ask so many officers, and I'd never intentionally approached an officer on my own, as I kind of referenced earlier, and ask them, who do you go to? Like, who do you listen to? When you got an issue, who do you go? Who gives you a hand? And everyone kept saying, Mike Sauschuk, Mike Sauschuk, Mike Sauschuk. And so I was like, well, I got to meet this guy. So I think those people are all around us, right? And hopefully we all get a chance to be that person somewhere in our lives. But so I found him, and so I think that's really key, is that there's just people that people have figured out. They figured out how to be solid enough, how to be honest enough, and how to be present enough for people to actually look and rely on you. And so that's big. And then building that relationship and taking their guidance, and then just persistence. And I kind of referenced this, but just people are, I keep in mind a couple things, and one is that everyone wants to do meaningful things. Everyone wants to do meaningful things. And if you frame it that way, I've had people who are in the morning ran up to me, the mayor of Portland, Maine, and said, why is there a contract with my name on it? I said I was coming to the workshop and I was not going to be in the performance. And I said, I know. I said, it's just backup. It means nothing. I heard you. I get it. I know, and that's fine. I said, but I thought, well, what if at the end of this day she changes her mind? So I made it up, And sure enough, at the end of the day, she changed her mind, and she was amazing in the performance, and so powerful. So I think is that kind of a helpful basis? And then I would never underestimate the power of jealousy. That people, it's a part of our nature, and it can kind of be thought about a little more benignly. And you can actually, in the public works meetings when they're saying no, 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 and I quote, one person said to me in the middle of a meeting, over my dead body, about one of my ideas. And I was like, good to know that's where you're standing. hadn't known that was your position. But if you can point out other cities, other examples, and really places where it really has made a difference, or it's something, I think that's important.
Well, I think your research of people is fascinating, and I think in this work, community work, you really have to understand the people and the residents and the diverse fabric that makes up your community. And Marty, can you talk a little bit about how sometimes it might feel that projects are permission-driven, but how are you communicating with folks to effectively address that it's not permission-driven to ask the municipality, that you're trying to collaborate with them and partner with them and make an impact in your community?
I'm not sure I got the question, and that's not unusual for me. But, you know, like Kimberly said, if you start, you know, you meet with the unions, you meet with the people who are actually doing it, and build those relationships, that matters a lot all the way. When did management and union have a cooperative, collaborative experience? Certainly not at the bargaining table, you know? And so how are you creating that terrain where they're actually, the ground they're walking on is to figure out what's a good collaboration. And so it's not and neither one's in charge, right? Like neither one is running it. They're getting to do it together. Yeah. But I don't know that that answers what you were
I
asking.
think maybe kind of where you're going is how can you articulate and define what the problem is that you're trying to address, right? So I think if you can come to a city, for instance, and say, we think we need, you know, more people to experience downtown, and we need to expose them to the you know, vibrancy that's here, and we want to create this event that really helps to attract different groups of people that we don't necessarily always see downtown. And this is kind of how we want to operationalize it. How can you help us to make this happen? I think that starts a whole different conversation than, you know, coming in and trying from kind of other perspectives.
Yeah, well, and I find too that a lot of the times when you go into these meetings, you all just have to understand that you're not doing things to each other. You want to do things with each other. You need to collaborate with everybody. You want everybody at the table with you. You're not going to your city council to tell them that you're doing this to them. You want to partner with them. And we just need to remember that when we're going into a room, reading the room correctly and being there with them, sharing the space, not commanding the space when you want to have something new done.
And Kimberly, talk about, you know, you said you've worked with MDOT. And so when you work with MDOT, a lot of times you're needing to get a permit or permission. And so when is the appropriate time to start talking and communicating with a partner or a municipality or a governmental agency to get permission to do something?
As soon as you can.
Agree.
Especially with MDOT.
Can you say that one more time?
As soon as you can. You should really get the players at the table at the beginning. If you don't have them at the table at the beginning, then they feel like you're doing it to them. And we want everybody on board. It's about collaboration and energy and people. And we don't want things done to us. So yeah, get them there from the get-go. Don't be afraid, because that's the thing that we always are, is we're afraid to get them at the table because we feel like then the project will stop. That is not the case that I find. It never stops, usually. I've never actually had a project stop because I asked permission.
Great. And
I had an accidental insight. When I just said that about the person who said over my dead body at the meeting, I never got back to them. You know, I never just in one-on-one and just said, say more, go on. You know, was it the idea? Is it me? Is it? And I realized that kind of listening, if I had figured out to go back and listen and actually hear where they were coming from, there is a way that kind of listening can be not only a solvent, a thinner, but it can actually start build a different relationship. So they may never be a fan, but, you know, for them to realize that I actually heard them and was interested in hearing more.
Well, and I think that is the middle, right? And ultimately, I believe strongly that when you do bring people together and have that open dialogue and that open planning, you end up with better events. You end up with better projects, and it just happens. I think some of the folks from the last panel would agree that, you know, opening up a project and really listening to folks in the neighborhood that are going to live with that project ultimately makes for a better project for them as well. It makes it more economically viable. So.
Well, and Tom, while we're on you, if someone were to say that the municipalities are trying to make it not possible to do the project, why would you say that that's not the case, and how would you respond to that?
Well, I think, you know, people have a tendency to have the perspective that municipalities are always in the business of red tape and saying no, and you know, some of that reputation is deserved. I was attracted to the city of East Lansing because it is a city that's known for you know, being experimental and trying new things, and so I guess my answer to that is, who are you talking to within the city? What kind of relationships are you building with folks? Do you understand where they're coming from telling you no? Is there a way to get to a yes? Is there a way to come up with a better idea that's going to get buy-in from the folks who make the decisions?
Yeah. And with all these projects, with any project, there's going to be challenges. There's going to be obstacles, and there's going to be hurdles you have to overcome with different types of partnerships, and particularly with a governing body. Kirk, do you have any examples of where you've come into these? And I think you've talked about it a little bit, but tell us maybe a specific example of where you hit an obstacle with, you know, with getting permission for something, and how did you overcome that?
Well, you know, we face less and less challenges because of being more proactive, and so it's kind of hard, like, to bring another challenge to mind, because we've created so many systems to mitigate that. And besides meeting in the middle between the communities we serve and the different bureaus that we work with, there's also the helping the communities themselves, like, you know, between themselves, also meet in the middle, because the type of projects we do require community consensus to be able to do a project. And you know, every year we work with 30 to 50 community sites installing projects, and there's always at least one site that doesn't have enough buy-in from their whole community so that their project can't move forward. But we try to provide as many tools and support as possible, and to overcome those. And maybe a neighbor said no to the project one year, but through maintaining, you know, open dialogue that we were kind of talking about, we've often seen that, you know, in a year or two, the projects can come into fruition.
Great.
I think that flexibility is important too when you're, you know, when you're in that dialogue. You can't just come in and have your idea and it's set in stone. And that's kind of part of meeting in the middle, right? I mean, you have to be willing to pivot a little. And I can think of numerous examples where you start out thinking it's going to be one way, and it ends up an entirely different way, and ultimately it was better.
Marty, tell us about how integrating artists and creatives into a municipal organization has sometimes challenged conventional thinking. How have they thought differently and more innovatively? And tell us some good examples of how that artists has positioned them for more creative problem solving in that community.
The one examples with the police officer, one of them is when she organized an entire photo exhibit for First Friday. But a couple things about working with artists for me, and that was, we talked on the phone about how do I pick the artist? What process do I bring to kind of think of who would be the artist, because it's an explosive, potentially explosive situation. It really is. I mean, you're working with the police, you know, that's a big deal. And it's their careers, and they're showing themselves by writing poetry, or they're showing themselves by telling stories about their lives and performance. So one, being like aware of that, but two, actually really protecting them, you know, and no time here, but so many times of saying, you know, not this poem, and trying to figure out, well, how can that poem be changed? But knowing like that poem shouldn't be published right now, that's not where the person is. But so with thinking about the artist quickly, it's, I was very keen on, well, when I investigated artists' work before I ever asked them, it was never an open call, which I think it could work either way. It was just me being super cautious and starting out this big thing. And then looking for artists who'd already put themselves in diverse situations, whatever that's economic or racial, but artists who'd already made the decision that to reflect, their lives and to be in their lives, that it was going to involve more than just one narrow path. And then teaching artists were good bets in terms of what the skills they had learned, because they're obviously crossing a lot of boundaries working with municipal workers. And then the kind of big issue was artists who could follow the leader, artists who didn't need to be the center of it all, artists who could actually give away that center, that focus of attention to the person they were working with. And that was really key. And that's not everybody, and that's the way it is set up. And so that was very important. And then if I said no, I needed artists who actually would trust my judgment, even if they didn't know me that well. And that was another big thing that was in the mix. And then in terms of the effect, artists, some officers kept writing poems, started writing poems, kept taking photographs. I didn't mention, but for every poet officer, there was actually a photographer. Someone had agreed to be partner with a professional photographer. So there was this whole other thing happening. And people were just having lots of, it was like a whole new thing. Portland, Maine's very conservative in terms of the municipality, and that's changed a bit, and they kind of don't want to get left behind. Lansing's way more engaged, Portland more so now, but and it was just lots of lessons, but that's some of it.
And Tom, if there was somebody trying to implement a project, say in East Lansing or probably in any community, what is the best path for least resistance and the most amount of support from that community?
I think it's to find yourself who the people are within the municipality that pay attention to the rules, that understand how to get stuff done. Go meet with them prior to when you have a project. Go set some contact before the context, and try to really use empathy to understand, where the city's coming from, what kind of issues they're dealing with, what kind of other things they're working with in terms of creativity. And I would say the best thing to do is talk to folks in the community, because it doesn't take too many conversations to get directed to the right person within the city structure. So I know in East Lansing, come talk to me. I know Andy and Brian in Lansing are happy to think creatively in Lansing, and I feel like every city that I've paid attention to has champions within it that really are invested in building community and want to help folks who are kind of that mindset to figure out how to get stuff done and make it a better place ultimately.
One of the questions, Josh, I wondered about was when do people engage elected officials? Because that's certainly one place to start, right? Talk to elected officials, win those relationships, make them, and then go in that way. And I just thought other people might have thoughts about that.
Does anybody else have thoughts on that one? I think it's a great point, and I think that it goes to that communication piece, that talking and getting everyone at the table that would maybe have to have a decision, sign off, that'll send you through a procedure, having them at the first round of conversations as you're developing the concept, that's the best time to do it, because when you want to do it next week and then you ask for permission, then that's most likely not going to work. And sometimes that's when people get frustrated because they don't always understand the appropriate process to go through. And so getting those people in the room to say, it's going to take you 6 months to get permission on that, it'll likely take 3 weeks for me to review it, understanding what those timelines look like are pretty key.
And I think for me, if I hadn't been in the city manager's office, and that was very strategic, I wouldn't have gone to Portland. I'd lived in New York City for a long time. And I only went because I got permission to be in the city manager's office, which meant people would answer the phone, right, if I called. And I knew they wouldn't if I wasn't.
Yeah. And Kimberly, you are implementing projects. You are doing this work. How do you go about garnering support, and what is that path? You've talked about it a little bit, but.
I know, I'm trying to get back to that moment. I think we've done a really good job of gaining the trust of our city council. Honestly, there's so much work that's being done all the time that if we can do some of the legwork and we can do some of the front work for them and they can trust that we're going to do it right, that's what we've done for them so we can implement projects. Some of the projects don't take as much as you think it does either. There's not that much red tape that has to be done. And if we can just get their trust as soon as possible, because there is rules. There is. It's just like school. It's just like grade school. There's rules. There's a certain way that you have to behave with city councils. There's certain government rules, and they're there for our protection, just like we tell kids when they're not supposed to run. There's a reason they keep us safe. So we need to, in certain ways, follow those things. But you can definitely do the work to a certain extent, you can do some of the background work for them. The collection of the data, all of that good stuff. I actually hate that part. Data is so hard for me because I'm such a creative. It's so hard to measure the success of a project by data. For me, I understand from a council standpoint they want the data. For me, I want to know how you felt when you were there. I want to know how the community felt when they were there. I want to understand what engagements that created, what relationships that built. That's the data that I measure. But we can get some measurable data for them, but some of the data will never be measurable. You will never be able to rekindle the magic you had that day. And just knowing what it created out of that, what projects spawned from that, what happened after that. That's how you measure a project, in my opinion.
There's your Deb and Megan already know about this, I know, but on animatingdemocracy.org, the website animatingdemocracy.org, there's not only a wealth of amazing projects, there's an entirely new, really well thought out way of doing evaluation, project evaluation for this kind of work that takes that into account and holds up. It's run by Chris Dwyer at RMC in Portsmouth, and they do $83 million evaluations of school systems and stuff for the government. So they're they're a good authority, respectable. And so that's a great place to go to just kind of get some help in making the case.
Sure, and just beyond that, I think that's a good reason why you should be inviting city officials and city staff to participate in events as well, because if they can experience that and kind of get the sense of how impactful that was in kind of more of a temporal way, then they tend to understand the value in sort of a broader sense.
And I just want to add this. Don't be afraid of the data to take a project to the table. You'd be surprised of all of your community connections that can help you garner and get that. Our community foundation, for example, they have the funds and the availability to hire somebody to get the data that I'm not able to get. I own a dance studio. I can't run numbers and get data on a project's scope of I can't even say all the language. You know what I mean? But there's people who can. And so don't be afraid if you have a great idea that you think it's too big for you. There's no idea too big for you. Because if you invite the players there, then you have hands to help you.
I think that's great. And so if there was one thing that each of you could leave with everyone today, kind of a piece of advice, words of wisdom from implementing these projects, what would it be? Let's start with you, Kirk.
For me, it is anchoring in the process, in the community building aspect, in that relationship building, because timelines can change, the form of the installation can change, the money can ebb and flow. We have elections, different times of the every 2 or 4 years. So there are all these different changes that can, if they're held on to, they can cause failure. But if there's that anchoredness in what the community is building toward, then that will help. Then I've seen that help move to success, even if it takes longer than originally intended.
Kimberly?
I have two. I'm sorry. You should figure that out by now.
You get one because you can't steal these shoes first.
I
You'll get your
won't, I
second
won't.
one after.
So you should always believe in the magic. Yeah. That's what they always say about me over there, because I just believe in the magic. I believe in the magic of people, in the magic of projects, and in the magic of what that can do for your community. And inclusiveness is always better than being an exclusive group that gets something done.
I think those are both great.
Thanks. I hope I didn't steal yours.
No.
You stole mine.
Martin?
That second one was mine.
Those were great. So I say keep the art bar high. The higher you keep the art bar, whether you're dealing with someone who's never carved anything or someone who's never taken a picture, the more surely and deeply the goals of whatever the project is are going to take place, right? And we had a police chief who wrote a bad poem. And I said, you need to write it back, you're not done. And then he said he wrote it again and it was still bad. And then the lieutenant came in and he told the lieutenant, oh, I'm done. He goes, what are you done with? He goes, I wrote the poem last night. And the lieutenant knows me well and said, you have no idea. And so we went back and forth, and finally I said to the police chief, and that's big, right? I mean, this is Mr. Permission, the police chief, right? And it's a permission-driven organization. And I said, would it be helpful if I show you what your officers have written? And that got him. And he wrote a half-decent poem. But it really makes a difference. And those officers would not have bought into the project if they weren't stunned by the quality of the first year, the poetry that other officers had written.
I think it would be to reach out to folks within City Hall. I mean, we're all part of the same community, and we're there to serve the community. And so start small, start with a conversation, and maybe build some relationship capital first, and try to understand where folks are coming from, so that when it comes time to try to implement your idea, you already have people that that know your heart's in the right place. You're being inclusive, and you're trying to do something ultimately to make the community better. So I think that's something that just opens doors automatically.
Well, right now we have some time for a couple questions. If anyone, Mr. Gil White.
It's a simple question. What can a unit of government do if it values citizen engagement? What can a unit of government do to become a better enabler and facilitator of that engagement?
So, I mean, I think this is where we're trying to do a lot of work, is to try to think creatively. And this is where we need people in the rooms help in terms of creative outlets to have those conversations that are sometimes difficult. And I think that's one of the things that we struggle with, is really how to engage folks from all walks of life, to really get involved in what's happening in the community and know that they have a place at the table and a voice. So I think we do some things. We need to do more of that, and I think ultimately we need people that are creative to help, create some opportunities for some of that to be activated in our community.
I would like to add on to that. He said, have a place at the table, and yes, I want a seat at the table, but sometimes I want to throw the table, right? Come join the other groups And we all do so much work and we're all so busy that it's hard for you to get to all the meetings that everybody else is having or to go join. But my advice to you would be, see what meetings other of your staff can attend, representatives, and don't just have it be a table. See what other creative settings you need to go to get that inclusiveness of every voice. Because not everybody meets at the table. You know what I mean?
Great point.
I missed going yesterday, but Midland, Michigan has a coffee with a cop at the local coffee shop on a regular basis, apparently. And so, like, that's just a great example of what you just said.
Is there another question out there?
Oh, can I answer your question 3 times ago?
There's one over here.
Yeah, let's let Jerry
Quickly,
ask, and then you
absolutely.
can, do you need to jot it down? Jerry.
Hello, my name is Jerry Smith. So I have a question. I'm also a creative and a part of placemaking. How is it that I can get minorities like myself, as I can see, like there's only a few black kids in here, and how can I engage them and be part of this community of trying to build the communities up, which therefore I was just talking to another artist about enhancing the communities, and then prices of the communities go up. How can we keep it where it's level, where we don't want the people in the communities moving out, but at the same time we want them to stay and embrace the enhancements of the community? So I guess I had 2 questions. How can I get minorities, young minorities like myself, creative artists like myself, participating in something like this, and how will we design the enhancements of the communities where we're not losing people in the communities?
Well, for city repair, our tactics are, for some of our services, we do have fees, even though we're a nonprofit. But for us, for communities from the margins, we don't charge any fees or make it significantly less, so that's accessible to get help to do placemaking actions. And then also for us, when we do programming, so like temporary placemaking, for ourselves, we have put a goal to have 50% folks of color or folks from marginalized communities, so that which are paid positions, so that we're ensuring that there's the economic support, because that's often lacking for us from the margins.
My answer to you is, I don't know, but I think that we could figure it out. So
Okay.
why don't we bring some folks together and sit down in a room and brainstorm about how might we do that.
Okay, sounds good. All right, thank you.
Thanks for the question, Jerry.
You're welcome.
Marty, do you want to answer
A
the-
quick thing, he asked me a while ago about creativity, inspiring creativity in the people I was working with, right? And by making visible, because I was working with city workers, with municipal workers, they are already making art. They don't necessarily call it that. So they're knitting, they're making these paper dollhouse constructions, very elaborate. They're making fishing lures, they're painting, they're making mosaic tiles, and they're writing and the writing and the writing. And so by making that more visible among the different departments, because I really did try to work department to department, that changed the department. They started showing each other what they were doing, and it became a very different kind of culture than it had been.
Is that Marcia?
You know everybody in the room.
How can you even see them?
How do, thank you. When you are in a community, do you have some best practices for multiple groups having multiple events, either on the same day or close to the same day, which is an effort, of course, to provide wonderful opportunities and placemaking for the participants, but also is a strain on the community and the businesses from a point of sponsorships, signing up volunteers, and the whole gamut.
I can answer this a bit. So in Nashville, we decided that we were just getting hit left and right with sponsorships and all that sort of stuff. Our business district now, that's our group collaborative marketing. We collaboratively market together. We collaboratively support together things. We vote each year on the things that we're going to support. Anything extra than that is a choice on your business. But as far as the different things getting scheduled on top of each other, we ended up partnering with even our school, our public library, which is key, because they have the ability to do a lot of the work if you can. The staff members have the time that they will reserve for you if you ask. And our group, we ended up investing in a community calendar. So that goes out, and all of our events are on that community calendar. So we try and look ahead. It doesn't always work. Sometimes we schedule events on the same thing as each other, but at least it's out there, and you can make an effort. The community calendar is not perfect by any means. Is it the best thing we've done? No. Is it helping? Yes, very much.
Good question. Thanks, Marcia. I think we're out of time, and so I just want to thank all of the panelists for being here today, and I hope that everyone felt like this was an opportunity to have a positive conversation as how we can meet in the middle, because I truly believe that if we can effectively communicate and sit down and talk together about ways in which we can push projects forward, there are tremendous ways in which the most innovative, creative, artistic ideas can happen, and that we truly have a region that is buying into creative placemaking, and they want to see projects like this happen all across the entire Tri-County area. So thank you guys so much, and enjoy the rest of the summit.
Creative placemaking is a topic that's really important to the organization I work for, LEAP, because we work really hard to make sure that the greater Lansing region is a place that people want to come, visit, as well as stay. That's on the level of big businesses as well as individual citizens. We just want to make sticky points for people in our community to attract to. We want to make good conversations, and we want to give people the opportunity to enjoy where they really live. The events turnout is magnificent. It's an honor, it's a privilege, it's a pleasure to be counted as a peer of so many people in our community that are developing our communities, that are catalysts and agents of change for the better. And we are all working together to change the narrative of the greater Lansing region of somewhere that's important, somewhere that's impactful, and most of all, somewhere that's more than mediocre. The subject of placemaking is extremely important to me because as a creative individual, some of my most creative moments and times were really spurred on by the locations that I was in, whether that's a city or a building. So it's very important to me to help establish a place where creative activity can not only happen, but be sustained.
Well, hello. So I'm your 2 o'clock after you've had lunch, everything's settled in, you're thinking about caffeine and sugar, but we're going to try and talk about the Cultural Economic Development Plan. So hopefully this will wake you up and get you enthused a little bit about the rest of the day. Creative 517. All of you have at your places a card that looks like this, and attached to it by a nice little rubber attachment is a USB drive. On that USB drive is a lovely designed version of the new economic development, creative and cultural economic development plan that has just been completed just a few weeks ago. and then we're going to be unveiling for you here today. So when you get back to your desk, you're going to want to put this USB in. You'll be able to see what that plan is by just sticking it in and opening the file. Now this little thing you can put it on your keychain, and you can carry this with you wherever you go. And you can be thinking about placemaking every time you pull this out and say, oh, Creative 517, it's right here in my pocket. I also want to point out that on the back of the card are the sponsors of those who came together to put the plan, to pull the resources together to make it happen. And many of these organizations were part of the steering committee, those who were part of putting the whole plan together. In fact, I think we have a lot of the steering committee members here today. I'm going to ask you to get up. It's actually giving you a chance to stretch for a minute, but if the steering members who were part of the plan who are here could stand up, just so everybody could recognize them. Thank you. And they deserve that applause because they put a lot of time and an effort in. We started in February. In fact, somebody reminded me earlier this morning that my first visit here was right after the Super Bowl because I was caught in O'Hare during a snowstorm watching the Super Bowl because I couldn't quite get to Lansing. But I did make it in time later that evening so we could get started the next day. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to do an overview of the process. Who did we talk to? What did we learn? And how did we develop this plan? I'm going to give you a brief overview of all that. There'll be some information up on the slides. We'll talk about what we call the goals and the strategies, again, some overview process. And where do we go from here? What are the next steps? What does implementation look like? And I'm going to be asking Debbie to come up with the last few minutes of this time so that she can talk about that implementation. Because this plan is not the consultant's plan, right? I may have been the consultant, but I'm actually a facilitator. What we set out to do was reflect what we heard from those who were involved in the planning process and to craft something that is representative of the Tri-County region, of the 3 counties in and around Lansing, who you are and where you're going. And just a couple comments and observations from this morning. I've really enjoyed everything that I've heard today. I was thrilled to hear Chris Fair this morning. I'd heard about his work. I'd never had a chance to meet him. I had an opportunity, Debbie hosted us for dinner last night, a few of us who are speaking today. And it was great to hear about his work. And I think it really pulls a lot together to really think about different ways of where do we stand? How do we compare to other places? That's a big question that comes up in any kind of cultural planning. And the panel that we just heard, you're going to see much of what you've heard in this conversation as well as the earlier panel and the creative placemaking representatives who were the sort of the TEDx examples earlier this morning. I think you'll see a lot of that reflected in this cultural plan. And it's no surprise to me, I suspect you designed some of today to reflect some of the things that are in the plan. That was very sneaky. But I think you will see that represented, and hopefully you'll find those connections, because that's the other part that's extremely important, is that you see yourself in this plan. We're going to do a couple things here, actually, for you to have a chance to participate in this conversation. It's not just going to be me talking at you. We're going to use a little thing called Poll Everywhere. Oops, come on. There we go. So I'm going to ask you all to take your phones out for a minute. Have any of you used Poll Everywhere before? Okay, a few hands are up. Some of you may have been at our session back in July when we kind of brought and tested some of these ideas. So you're going to text a message to 22333. That's the number you're going to text to. And that message is going to be Creative 517. And you should get back in a moment after you do that saying, welcome, I think it'll say, welcome to Martin Cohen's polls for Creative 517 or something along those lines. So first thing we're going to ask, just as a test, you're going to put in A, B, C, or D. The weather's changing, the leaves are changing. That doesn't mean you have to vote for autumn, but vote. What is your favorite season? All right, well, you guys are getting it's clear, autumn is a sense of change. It's good because a lot of creative placemaking is about change, right? And So the close to 50% of you, now maybe that's because right now you're enjoying the fact that it's supposed to be down to 39 degrees tonight, right? And so it's cool, you're at Christmas, you're ready to put on your flannels. Right? So we see that. So you get an idea of how this works. And I'm going to share with you one more way that this works. I'm going to ask, some of you still voting? Okay. I'm going to go on to the next slide. I'm going to ask you, so who's here today? I'm going to ask you, are you an artist, an administrator, a developer? Just type in the word and text that. Not what season, what do you do? So what we're seeing here, great, some of you are putting in your actual organizations, but what we see is administrators and artists are the dominant group, it seems, from a word cloud here. Some government close behind. See some designers, developers, bankers. What's that? Can you vote twice if you really have to? I will say this will filter out profanity. But it does not filter out emojis. If you really have to express yourself with an emoji, you can do that. I know you're all going to try that now. We're going to see what comes up. So I'm not sure it actually does it on the word cloud, but there's another place where you can put in an emoji. There you go. Maybe I shouldn't have told you that. All right, how many of you put in the clown emoji? How many of you are clowns? I see 2 or 3 hands going up. All right. Okay, poop emoji, really? All right, so let's slow down. Now we're going to talk about, now we're going to actually. All right. So, well, that continues. We're going to start talking about the Cultural Economic Development Plan. All right, we're going on to now. Here's the good stuff, right? What did we actually do? So we took essentially a 4-step process in developing the Cultural Economic Development Plan. And it's what makes these plans relevant is that it's talking to the people who are here. It's not me just coming in and reading data, but we talked to a lot of people. We had 14 sector discussion groups. What do we mean by sector? Individual artists, creative business owners, people working in education, we had administrators from nonprofit organizations, we met with festivals. So we had 14 of those discussion groups. There were over 100 participants, and I suspect many of you were in the room. Just a quick show of hands, how many in the room were one of those discussion groups? Actually, not as many as I expected, but it's good that you're here. So your input, hopefully, you'll see reflected here today. And we had many work sessions with the project steering committee, sharing information, what we heard, having a chance to respond to it, tweak it, and interpret it. We had a lot of individual interviews with over 25 individuals in many different sectors, in the development sector, economic development, elected officials. I had a chance, my very first trip here, to meet Mayor Shore, which was a great pleasure. I think he'd been in office for 2 or 3 weeks. I'm not sure he knew where his office was at that point yet, but the excitement for what he was doing and what he shared with us this morning and how much he does care about the cultural life of the community was evident. And by the cultural community, I mean that in a very broad term. So we talked to many, many representatives across sectors and heard what they say. We also heard from individual artists. We did a census. Some of you may have participated in that. And the reason we did that census, and there's more information about this in the plan, we wanted to get an idea. Everybody says, how many artists do we actually have in the region? Well, there's only one way to really know that, and that's ask the question and ask people to self-identify. So for those who got over the idea that when the survey went out, that the NSA wasn't trying to identify them and track them, they would actually tell us who they were, where they lived, and what their discipline was. And there were about 110 artists in the 3 counties that told us that. And we know there are more than that out there. So we just have a representative sample. I've been working with Debbie to make sure that the Arts Council, they can keep that survey open, they can expand on it, and they can actually, I'd be happy to work with them to actually create a more robust map So maybe there's an opportunity to go back and get a better idea of what does our artistic community look like, but their voice was in here as well. That was part of the data. We looked at creative economy data. We looked at the nonprofit arts and culture community, and as I said, with the individual artists, and we looked at a lot of different data from other documents, whether they were creative plans or whether they were municipal plans, economic development plans, et cetera. All those things went into the mix to what we did. So what did we hear from all of you, those we did talk to and those we heard from? These are the key themes that we heard from across the 3 counties. You know, we heard the strength of the creative placemaking efforts. This is Creative Placemaking Summit 4. So let me share. Tomorrow morning, I'm on a very early plane out of Detroit, back to, actually I'm flying in and out, I'm from the Philadelphia area, but I'm flying back to Baltimore because in College Park, Maryland is the National Placemaking Summit. And here's what I can tell you. Now you're from the 3-county region of Lansing, right? The number of people here is significantly greater than those that are attending the National Placemaking Summit, the first one that's happening tomorrow in the Washington, D.C. area. Give yourselves a hand, right? Look what you've built here. And I've been to some of the regional creative placemaking plans, and none of them have as large as attendance as you have here, which shows you are actively thinking about this information. This was a great strength. It's built over the years, and you're seeing that coming out each time. The depth and the breadth of the individual artist community definitely came out. It was often referred to as kind of under the radar. It was kind of hidden. It was somewhat connected, but not deeply connected. And one of the things you'll see reflected in the plan are there ways to create deeper connections and sort of bring it a little bit less underground and a little bit more above ground. How can we build those? I should have mentioned also, did I miss? No, I haven't gotten to the festivals yet. So the festival capital was actually the next thing. We heard everybody talked about, when we talked about what is the character of the place? What can you describe Lansing? And everybody talked about the 100 or so festivals that happen across the 3 counties, and that they are deeply part of who we are and how we express ourselves. I think through this plan we can say that this is something to actually build on and celebrate as part of the identity, maybe even in a deeper way. Going back to what Chris talked about, one of the things to think about is how can we build on that? Not that you aren't already doing that to a certain extent, but is there even a greater way to do that? One of the frustrations I heard was just the general philanthropic environment. Great kudos, if you will, and lots of people talking about the individuals who are extremely generous in this community. Those who support the arts here, that support creative efforts, that support us to do the work of social change, of individual artists, of other sorts of ways, but that the broader philanthropic community is somewhat constrained here. It's generous, it's forward-thinking, but it's not large. There's not an enormous, what we call, in many communities, the catalyst philanthropy. I come from Philadelphia. I suspect many of you have heard of Pew Charitable Trust. You hear it every day on NPR. They're based in Philadelphia. Well, there are 2 foundations in Philadelphia, Pew Charitable Trusts, the William Penn Foundation, and they drive change in that city. They have the resources to do that. Here, there's a collaborative effort, but how can we build on that? It's not just about getting more philanthropy, but making sure that there's a good collaborative conversation around this creative plan and how that can involve the philanthropists. There were better opportunities to integrate artists and immigrants in international communities in the work of creative placemaking. Potential growth and expansion for cultural and creative hubs, because there are many across the 3 counties. Everybody talks about REO Town, certainly heard a lot about Old Town, heard about Williamstown, heard about Okemos, St. John's. I'm sure I'm missing others that are in the plan. So that's no offense to those who live in those other places, but those are the ones that immediately come to mind. But some of those are on small scale. How can we begin to create a sense as a tri-county region that all of these places are hubs and spokes that are connected together? So going back to Chris this morning, part of our identity is come and spend 3 or 4 days in the Lansing region and go to all the hubs. What will your experience be if you go to all those hubs? Again, culture, cohesiveness in the cultural sector. I talked to a lot of people who are leaders of, administrators of arts organizations and nonprofit sector. They felt there could be greater cohesiveness there, and that could be part of this process. The lack or limited access of availability of mid-size and smaller performing arts venues was a frustration, and I know that's something that's being talked about in the community. And something that you heard, I think, is it Kim that you were talking about, Kimberly, that you were talking about the community calendar, but there's a lot of different things that calendars were being talked about and communications, and there's some strategies in there. So let me get into, I'll stop, take a breath. All right, that's what we heard. So what did we do with it? This is a framework for thinking about how we developed a plan. Looking for something that's aspirational. Where do we want to go? What was different about this plan than what you did 10 years ago? Almost 10 years ago, right? Well, I think there's a few differences, and we'll talk about those when we talk about the strategies and the approach to it and the goals. It was important that it be grounded in the research. Right? What did we hear, and how do we translate that into something that is meaningful to all of us, that is reflective of us? Do we have partners in the community who will own the strategies? We're going to talk about that actually in the last piece, which is implementation, because they're not directly identified yet, but there's a process in the plan for people to come forward. Who owns this plan is a big question, because it's a collaborative effort. And I think that's a worthwhile conversation in the community. Ultimately, as I talked about earlier, it has to reflect the character of Lansing, because every place is idiosyncratic. And so that character is who you are, where you come from, how you do your work, what are the things that make us, what makes us special, what are the barriers of how we have to work. But hopefully those are reflected in the plan. Strategic, actionable, we can do this, it makes sense, it pushes us, it's aspirational, but we know we can make this, it's not so far out there. By the way, this is a 5-year plan, not a 10-year plan. That's one of the big differences. And so it's flexible. Things change, environment changes, economic environment changes. All those things go in, and if a plan can't change, then it's not a useful plan. And as I said earlier, who owns this? How do we hold ourselves accountable to moving this forward? And all those things are taken into consideration in developing the plan. So with that, as I said, it's a 5-year plan. What's different is the last one, I can't remember how many goals or how many strategies it had, but it was the right plan at the right time, and it had use. In fact, I'd say one of the things that came out of it was this Creative Placemaking Summit idea, and an outgrowth of that plan. And so it had an impact. But we wanted to keep this compact in a sense. So there are 4 overarching goals and 11 strategies. Now, within those 11 strategies, there are 23 actions. You can call this the to-do list. These are the more practical, how do we make that happen? And when you have a chance to read the plan, you'll see that with almost every strategy, I think 95% of them, maybe it's not quite 100%, but 95% or so of them have links to examples of things around the country, of other ways that people have done this, because we heard some of that today earlier from speakers and panelists, and there's always questions about who else is doing this and how are they doing it. So we've tried to provide some way for you to see how those things are put into action. And it's not about you necessarily duplicating what others do, but how can we take what others have done and make it our own? And those things then show up in the strategies and the actions. So I am very quickly, watching the time here, we're going to quickly talk about the 4 goals and something about the strategies and how those are manifested, and then we're going to have a little bit of a conversation. So the first goal is about celebrating, leveraging, and building upon the strengths and assets of arts and culture that are already here. We know that. So expanding investments, by the way, of public art is one of the things that is already underway, but there's many opportunities to do this even further on a regional basis as well as on a local and municipal level. Municipal public art programs are growing dramatically in this country. Funding mechanisms are being looked at. But the fact is you're working as a region And there's great things, the program that LEAP does, that's the annual grant, the annual award for public art. But how can this be a little more intentional? What are the things that you can do? And these show up in the strategies. I'm not going into all the particulars right now, but I think there's an enormous amount of potential here that'll show up in the plan. There are good, solid promotional tools, not only good and solid, but you really forward-thinking. And you saw that in some of Chris's presentation this morning about how Lansing was higher up in terms of how it presented itself to the outside world, how social media was actually looking at Lansing. So how can you build on some of those promotional tools? Again, there's some strategies and some actions there. And thinking about expanding about yourselves as the festival capital. So the first thing is let's step back and first and foremost, what are we really good at? What are our great strengths and how do we build on those and capitalize even further on those? Because if we're going to add to that vibrancy, right, we've heard a lot about vibrancy today. And these are elements that are embedded in vibrancy. Number 2 is about fostering the environment and conditions that support and encourage artists and creative entrepreneurs. So as we saw all those various emojis going by, as well as the titles, what we know is that we have a lot of creative entrepreneurs and artists in this community. Right? They may be underground. We may not have identified them in the effort to try and do a census, but we know that they're here. How do we actually create an environment that is more encouraging to them? What that we can do? So what are those systems that can create greater connections between artists and individual artists? I can give you an example of something. I was at my table earlier today. I was sitting with a member of the new task force that's working with the city of Lansing, the Arts Task Force. And an email came by and I thought, I shared with her something called Creative Mornings. Are any of you familiar with Creative Mornings? I see one hand here. A couple hands over here. And I'm suggesting, why do you think about doing Creative Mornings here, bringing it to Lansing? Well, I know it's actually in Ann Arbor, it's in Grand Rapids, it's in 3 or 4 other cities in Michigan, but I looked at their website and it's not in Lansing. Well, Creative Mornings is a once-a-month gathering around a theme, basically, that would bring together many workers in the creative community to talk about various issues within the creative sector. That's all I'll say about it. But those types of things, how can you enhance those and expand on those systems to create greater relationships, and both between individual artists as well as creative entrepreneurs in the community. Enhancing efforts to foster a stronger sense of community and a stronger coalition among the nonprofit arts organizations. There are nearly 300 across the 3 counties. It's not an inconsequential number. How can they band together? The Arts Council is already doing some of that, but how can we take it up a notch? How can we get together and do stronger and thoughtful and intentional advocacy and community building as a community? As arts administrators, I spent 20 years managing ballet companies before I went into the organizational development and consulting field, which was about close to 20 years ago. But in those years as an executive director in the ballet field, I was worried about payroll. Every other Thursday, all this hair that's gone is because I was worried about paying a lot of people every other Thursday. And we understand those pressures, but how do you take yourselves out of that day-to-day function and making sure that not only you're making payroll and your programs are happening and all the things, and you're managing your board, but how do you then pull yourself out and start to think of as a community in a stronger way? Making sure you carve out the time to do it, and what are the strategies of how we can get there? And the third piece of this in the environment is this, what I call creative hubs. You have the bones in place in the Lansing region to really build a much stronger sense of those creative hubs, that they are important, not just important places, but they are places of activity. They are places where you will experience vibrancy, that they'll draw people to them, but they're also connected with each other. They're not individual and mutually exclusive. They exist in an ecology, if you will, or an ecosystem. And how can we think of them as a whole. And I think that's an interesting challenge. One of the challenges of this plan is that it is regional, and how do we do that? So, thirdly, supporting and enhancing the work of municipalities and area agencies by integrating artists and creative entrepreneurs into municipal and government departments. Does that sound familiar from this morning? Right? We heard Marty talk about her work, Art at Work. And it's something that's beginning to happen more and more. In the appendix of the plan, if you have a chance to scroll down, there's about 10 or 12 examples of many different ways that municipalities have embedded artists in their work. Some of my favorite ones, I love the one that's SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence at NASA, has an embedded artist in residence program. And they're doing 2 or 3 things. They're working with artists about how the scientists at SETI can help communicate what they're doing better, because they're scientists and they're thinking about extraterrestrial intelligence. And how do you communicate that to the rest of the world? And how do they communicate with each other? And how do they communicate with artists? And one of those elements is, if they do encounter extraterrestrial intelligence, how do you communicate with them? And their artists are embedded in that conversation. In Los Angeles, the mayor of Los Angeles, is anybody familiar with Vision Zero? It's a national movement. I see probably some municipal folks are available, or familiar. So Los Angeles brought an artist in to work with Vision Zero. Vision Zero is about how do we eliminate any pedestrian fatalities, i.e. bad intersections where pedestrians are getting hit. How did they do it? They embedded an artist into the work of that process, and that artist is redesigning intersections and the interface of those intersections to decrease fatalities. Many examples. So one of the strategies here is the suggestion that as a region, and I'm not suggesting this is LEAP's role, but similar to what LEAP is doing with public art, something along those lines where there's 2 or 3 artist residencies a year to create a circuit rider across the municipalities here. Because not every municipality, a town of 5,000 people, may not see the value or have the resources to embed an artist. But what if there were circuit riders who understood this work, how to work with transportation departments, with public safety, to work with police departments, to youth recidivism, the efforts of those municipalities? What if we could create artists from the region who can take those tools and be circuit riders to work with the municipal challenges across the community? Social practice is becoming bigger and bigger in arts. It's not just about social practice, it's about creative placemaking and creative problem solving. So let's build on that, and I think that's the next step that's here. Oh, the last thing here, I'm kind of far away from myself, so you may not be able to read that, especially all the way in the back. But it's a suggestion that at some point you get to creating an annual regional innovation prize. And that could go in many directions. There's a lot of places that have prizes. But the idea is, how do we reward risk and trying something new in this region? Now, for arts organizations, that may be, how do we get the money to do things that we haven't done before, and that we want to try things, and we don't want to worry about losing money. For individual artists, it may be something that can affect a community or neighborhoods. For economic development organizations, maybe it's to do something with artists. I mean, there could be any number of ways of doing it. So there's a lot in the plan about that. And I'm going to move a little quicker just because the last thing is about identifying and leveraging resources for building the creative and cultural community. Most difficult thing to find. I love this William Steig cartoon. We all want money to magically appear. This was an old New Yorker cartoon that just, as an arts administrator, speaks to me very well. You know, I understand what this is about. But I think that doing some research, talking to philanthropy, you know, really looking at comprehensively the public and private sector here. That was not a charge in this plan, but I think that really understanding it, you'll see there's a strategy around that and some very specific things to look at. There's data that can be mined. There are national sources with this plan. You know, Marty, was it you that you were talking about the Our Town program? Yeah, right. So not that people in Lansing aren't aware of these things, but I think you'll you're ready to really go out and you have something to bring these national resources, there are national philanthropies that would look at Lansing. And the work that you're doing around creative placemaking and creative development, I think there's national resources. And I think there's opportunities through all of these things to find ways to bring creative pools, creative and cooperative and collaborative pools of resources together, because there's no one agency that has the resources now to do it. One of the artists, and excuse me for not recalling your name this morning, you talked about, we're kind of an up from the bootstraps. You talked about Scrap Fest. And by the way, one of the editing problems that we had with the plan, and we caught it, we talked about Scrap Fest, and somebody caught that there was an E, so it said Scrape Fest. But we caught it says Scrap Fest. But you talked about Scrap Fest and the fact that it comes up, and it's organic and things that, so how do we build on our strength as doing things organically and cooperatively? So we think that there's opportunities in this plan to identify resources cooperatively and pulling them together for the creative and cultural community. So that's in a nutshell. And what is it we're trying to really accomplish with this? We're trying to build vibrancy. We're trying to create an environment where artists are more successful. We're trying to create a place where more people participate, where communities are engaged. We're talking about the built environment. We're talking about the region, just having a greater and deeper integration of creativity and how it identifies itself, how it expresses itself, how it participates. So there's a lot of opportunities, I think, that can come out of this. There's so many strengths in the region. So I think I'm getting close to do it, but I do have a couple questions before we bring Debbie up. So get your phones out. And then maybe we'll have a time for a question or two. So you can text in a few words here. What one thing in this plan excites you the most? And please, no poop emojis again. What one thing in this plan excites you the most? And this will scroll. This is not a word cloud. This will scroll by. Again, you haven't read the whole thing. You've just seen the top line of it. But whoever put that in there, how did it show up? Did you just put it in grant dollars? Yeah. Okay, so maybe it's an internet problem. I don't know. You have to make sure you send it. There we go. All right. Well, I think you're getting a sense of that. And again, I want to be mindful of your time. We'll have a chance to talk about it. And I think you're getting a sense of the kinds of things. And the reason I ask this question is, right, we want to know is, do you see yourself in there? And in what ways do you see yourself in there? What really stands out for you? Because this plan is going to mean something different to everybody in this room, depending on what you do and where you come from. Oh, it's now letting you vote. Okay, that's not how it was set up. Well, I'm going to cut you off. So if you're texting, I'm going to ask you to stop, because we're going to go to the next question, which is, this is a yes, no, or a somewhat. And you put in yes, no, or somewhat. I'm sorry, A, B, and C. A is yes, B is no, somewhat is a C. Do you see yourself or your organization reflected in these goals? Well, good. 2/3 of you do. About 1/3 of you are uncertain. And hopefully when you read the plan in full, you'll see more of it, when you can see more of that actually bring up ideas, and you'll begin to see because part of what we need to talk about, again, is as this moves forward, not only where do you see yourself, but what role do I have in bringing this to fruition? It is going to be a collaborative effort, because not one individual or one organization owns this plan. It is intended to be regional in that sense. And the last question is, in just a few words, and call this a quick vision question. And I know you're just seeing 40 minutes or 35 minutes of presentation. In a few words, call this a vision. What would you want to see different in 5 years when this plan's a success? 2, 3, 4 words. What does that look like? Dragons. Yeah, so they're going by, they'll scroll by, more connective tissue, tourists, more color in Lansing, community inclusivity, fun and beauty, easy to find, dragons. Equity, inclusivity, less dead space downtown, higher awareness, exposure through collaboration, more public art, people traveling to come to Lansing. This is a destination. Economic gains, cultural hubs, better, earlier collaborations, branding, I'm not sure what A is. Yes, I think A is yes. Regional connections, strengthening the regional connections, a more vibrant community, yes, indeed. Homogenized programming, more corporate funding for the arts, more artists in 517. We talked a lot about, right, how can we foster that environment and bring more artists here? B, yeah, we know the alphabet. Pride for the area, all happy people. All right, we got some snarky ones here, I see. Vibrancy, C. More vibrancy. We got vibrancy and more vibrancy. All right, so making a difference. Please just keep texting in. We're up against time here. And I encourage you, when you do have time, to stick that USB in, read through the plan. It's not terribly long. It's not intended to be a tome. I love the idea you're getting it on a USB and you're not getting a big printout version that's going to end up in recycling. Share it with your friends. Share it with others here in Lansing and in the region. Get them excited about this. And Debbie, if you want to come up and join us and talk about implementation, I'll keep up here, and we may have some, I don't know if we have time for questions. So.
No, really fast. I just want to thank Martin. He's been with us six visits?
Yeah, something like that.
6 visits. And we've gotten to know him, and we pulled him out of a lineup through the RFP process, and I think we're pretty pleased with what he's delivered and all of the interviews with all of you. And so can we give Martin a really big round of applause, please?
And all of you.
So there's a couple more people that I really want to thank, and about 2 weeks ago, we were wondering how we were going to deliver this to you. And I had a conversation with Scott Keith at LEPFA. Scott, are you still here? I'm not sure. But Scott said, hey, I think we might be able to do that over here. And this young woman, and he said, and Marisa can do it. So Marisa James, please stand up. Marisa was the one instrumental in doing all of the graphic design and all of the layout for this wonderful plan. So thank you. We actually used an artist from Peckham. One of our artist members was doing a class, and she sent me over some of the artwork, and I said, oh my God, that would be really wonderful if we could use that. And so the Peckham artist is listed in your plan, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna mess her name up, but she is an artist that has spina bifida, and she created some paint pours, and Marisa took the paint pours and really created a wonderful plan. So again, I'm very grateful for Scott, who stepped forward and said, I'm a community member, I can help. And Marisa for stepping up and saying, yeah, I can do that in 2 weeks. So, but we've got some really wonderful things. This is available also on the Arts Council website. It should be available on all of the sponsors' websites as well. And I want to do one more big round of thank yous to those sponsors. It started with the Community Foundation. So Lori, Dennis, I see you back there. Thank you for the community grant. It was an impact grant, and it was matched over that amount by CATA and the City of East Lansing and the Greater Lansing Convention and Visitors Bureau and Lansing Community College, LEAP, LEDC, the Lansing Regional Chamber of Commerce, MEDC, the Greater Lansing Regional Prosperity Initiative, and Michigan State University. And we're really pleased because they stepped forward. We knew that this plan was not owned by any of us, it was owned by the community, and we all now have to take charge of implementing what Martin has so kindly put together for us and taking all of your comments. So next steps, and again, I'll be really brief, but next steps, are gathering the steering committee one more time to go through the planning document, to identify the roles that we each want to take. We certainly think that the Greater Lansing Convention and Visitors Bureau will take on that calendar, right? And identify not only what you are all going to do, but identify other partners that can help us implement. We have 5 years and 4 goals, and we really have a lot of work to do. And then we want to identify those of you who are in the audience, those other artists that are not here, anybody else that's not here, identify those who want to become involved in helping us implement this plan, going after additional funding for the implementation, and making the capital region a really wonderful place to live, work, and visit through the lens of arts and culture. I'm a true believer. I'm probably the best believer in art for art's sake. There is no doubt that I believe that. But I am a Bob Trezise fan that art and culture is an instrument to achieve economic prosperity for this region. And we are all working together to make that happen. So we have great partners, great people working on this. These are the movers and shakers that are in this community, and we are going to take the next 5 years to really do some even greater things than we did in the last 10. So thank you very much. The Arts Council, this is our 4th year doing the Creative Placemaking Summit, and we talked about only doing this for 3 years. So the first year was really to get us all on the same page. So we have a cross-sector of our community coming together. It's designers and developers and city officials and municipal officials, our college university leadership, artists, arts and cultural leaders. Once we're all in the same room and we're talking together, all of a sudden we start to work off of each other. We start to build new relationships that we might not in our own silo. And once that starts to happen, we start to see the fruits of our labor, I'll call it. The fruits of our labor meaning more projects, more experiences. So the Arts Council was only going to do this for 3 years, but what we have found is that people are so enamored with having outside experts come into Lansing and talk about all of the great things that are happening. We really we want to transform and use our artists and our musicians and others to actually create the kind of place that they're looking for. I think that we're looking at how do we retain talent? How do we retain those who are graduating from MSU and keep them in this community? And until we have activities and events and things that are happening, experiences that are happening in our region, we may be losing them to other cities and other places. And so the more we can do to actually get them to be a part of the community in some way, I think that there is a lot of activity happening to make them maybe reconsider leaving this area and being a part of this community for an extended period of time, not just for a 4-year degree, not just because they grew up here, but what makes this place attractive? How do we look at our community in comparison with other communities? We don't want to be bland. We want to be thriving and dynamic. And that means that we all have to come forward. Our artists and our arts organizations and other organizations have to come together, and they have to find a way to create the kind of experiences that other people will want to have.
All right. So as they've told you before, my name is Kimberly Rodriguez, and I am from Nashville, Michigan. I always have to say Nashville, Michigan, because so many people don't realize there's Nashville, Michigan. Yes, I've been asked from Michiganders to do this. It's right here. Okay? It is on M66 in between Battle Creek and Ionia. If you blink, you will miss it. We do not have a stoplight. We do not have a traffic light. A blinking yellow at the far end of town by the Dairy Creamery. We don't even have a 4-way stop. So it's very hard for us to get people to slow down and see what Nashville has to offer you. That's been our main thing for the last couple years, is placemaking and creating events that bring people to our town to see what we have to offer as a community. And then it's our job as community members to get them to come back. We coined ourselves, which was an old coin as well, but the Friendly Village. So it's also a nice reminder for our business members. Smile. The community members, smile when you walk downtown. Remember, we are the Friendly Village. So please be that. A couple of years ago, 2016, you'll see this is what magic can happen. There was a Love Where You Live event. They had them all over Michigan, and at those events, they created micro grants. At the Love Where You Live event, our town had a table full of people from Nashville, and if you won, you got a $1,000 grant from this to put on an event. So our local creamery is a big part of our business district, and if you don't know of them, it's Mooville. Yeah, they are in Nashville. We will not share them. We need them. None of you can take Mooville. So Mooville was at that table, and we thought, why don't we try and break a world record? That sounds like something amazing to do. Totally achievable in a town of 1,700, right? So we decided to break a world record of the world's longest ice cream sundae. We did it on our second attempt. I don't like to tell people it was the second one. Yes, it's very good. Little do we know at the first attempt that New Zealand was turning in their numbers at the same time we did, and they beat us by 51 feet. So that next spring, Ludington, House of Flavors, I'm sorry if you're from Ludington, you guys decided to try it too, and we were like, whoa, whoa, whoa. This was our idea first. We're going to take it by storm. And 3,627 feet long of ice cream made in a trough out of rain gutters by our local hometown lumberyard. 47 business teams scooped the ice cream out. They had to connect. Every single scoop had to touch. It was how many football fields? I believe it said there. Do you remember, Abby? It was a lot. 864 gallons of ice cream, 7,200 cherries. It was amazing. 57 gallons of strawberries. Don't worry, we didn't all dive in with a spoon. It brought 5,000 people to our town that day. We're a town of 1,700. We had 5,000 people come to attempt the world record with us and break it with us. That's a huge event. That's a huge chance to get people to see your town. So now the big question is, how do you create magic again? What do you do? Yes? 12 football fields. See, I knew it was a lot. 12 football fields. So how do you go about and create magic again? I just have to give a shout out to, I see Melissa in the audience. I see Andy in the audience. I see Brian in the audience. You got my college degree from Lansing Community College, people. Like, Lansing is great. Yeah. I took that associate's degree and I opened my studio at 21. It's 15 years old now. Like, Lansing creates some magic too. Like, not only Nashville. Okay, so world's longest ice cream sundae, how do you duplicate that feeling, that spirit? In 1978 to 1985, there was a concert venue in Nashville called Sandyland Park. Chubby Checker, Conway Twitty, Loretta Lynn, many bands played at Sandyland in Nashville, Michigan. It was coined Nashville of the North. We've tried. We had all of sorts of, this is Sandy Sailors. He's who opened Sandyland Park, hence the name Sandyland. Yeah? That's the old original shirt of Sandyland. I came to see the stars at Nashville, Michigan. As you can see back here, there was camping up above it. So people would come for the weekend. They would bring their campers. They would camp out. There would be concerts the whole weekend long. This happened for many summers. Well, of course, weather, marketing, the economy changed. In the 80s, people weren't going to outdoor concert venues anymore. They were going to the indoor arenas. That whole vibe came in. The park closed, and there's a throwback. I just have to show you this. Juice Newton. Does anybody remember Juice Newton? Oh, yeah. She played at Sandyland. That on the bottom is Bill Anderson. This is Mel Tillis when he played. I keep getting close to the other one. So Waylon Jennings played there, Merle Haggard, Roy Clark, more. People don't realize all these bands that played in Nashville, Michigan. Sandyland is located in between the funeral home and the church. And there's a hayfield in front of it now. And, well, not anymore, but. And nobody knew it was there unless you grew up from Nashville. So at one morning breakfast, we were talking about how do we recreate the magic of the ice cream sundae? Well, Kimberly over here likes bright ideas. And I was like, let's open Sandyland. Let's just have a concert in the field just to pay homage of what was there before. We were going to rent a stage. We were going to rent the sound, rent everything, and just mow the fields and have a concert there and say, look, we're here. It's still here. It's not really intact, but come and watch a concert. So budget-wise, we're all about numbers and data, right? Budget-wise, it was about $5,000 to rent the stage and the equipment. And we decided, why invest all of that money one time? That just doesn't make sense for a one-time concert when you can create memories over and over again with families. So instead of investing the money one time into the field, into renting a stage, we decided we'd rehabilitate the stage. In the early 1990s, a group of kids vandalized it, burned part of the stage. That happens when things aren't used. It's our fault too. It wasn't being used, it was left vacant, right? Well, there's the venue. That's what we walked back to. That actually was the historic concert, Sandyland Park. Needless to say, we had a lot of work to do, right? So this was obviously in the winter, there's still snow on the ground. So it was time to start planning, it's time to start booking concerts. I've never booked a concert. I don't know what I'm doing, but I do know people. So you just start to make those connections. Charlotte Performing Arts Center, the lady who's the manager of that right now, I'm good friends with her. She got me in contact with Kevin Meyer with Common Ground. I figured out how to book bands, make that connection. I don't know what I'm doing, but here I'm gonna write this, and we're gonna try and book you. So we ended up booking, well, here's some more pictures. Those are the bleachers that were there on the hill. Yeah, they're really nice. And that was the inside of the building. I would like to let you know that nobody has seen these pictures except for you. You're very special. I have not shown these pictures to anybody just because, you know, rules. So we ended up bulldozing all of this. The hill. We could not save the bleachers, obviously. That was not savable. So we ended up booking an upcoming Michigan veteran. That's a good way to get people to your concert. Not in that way, but he donated money to Wounded Warriors projects. His name is Matt Williams. He still plays around the area. I don't know if anybody has seen him play. And one of the American Idol alums actually at that time had a connection to our town. So we were able to book him. And then because Mel Tillis used to play, we thought, you know, we need to pay homage to what used to be there. It was bluegrass, it was country. We need to have country there. So we had Pam Tillis. We had this, if you build it, they will come mentality. So we were working hard. We started our marketing project, you know. That never hurts, right? That never hurts at all. We have a really good Facebook page. Back when we did the ice cream sundae, it is amazing, but Facebook did come to Nashville, and literally the Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg sent one of his associates to do a story on our ice cream sundae, talking about community impact and about how a small project can impact a community for years, and about how that connection of the people that day and what happened that day can create memories that last a lifetime. He then showed it at his Monday morning meeting the next week. He flew in Facebook. We like to tell you that. So we have to be known for a few things, right? So we started our marketing. In the meantime, we were busy working on the stage. A little selfie there for you. Lots of hard work. I was just talking to somebody else about this. We all know everybody loves good ideas, but the same 20% of the people are the ones doing the work all the time, right? Well, it doesn't change. But as long as you're working along people that you love and for people that you love, take a break once in a while, but keep doing the work, right? Keep doing the work. So we bulldozed the hill, we planted grass seed, we painted, we built the stage, and that's the front of it. That little thing on the bottom down there, that's my daughter. The top just is a beautiful picture of it. I wish you could see it better. And then we had our show. That is the stage restored, yeah. I don't know, like, the magic of the moment that we turned on those speakers for the first time and brought the music back to that hill. We had generations on that hill. Our house band that opened the show, the drummer's dad was one of the main players that played when the venue was open 30-some years ago. The magic of that day, we've tried to recreate a few times. It's never quite the same, but we still have community members come out, all ages. It's a family-friendly venue. And I don't think you've ever seen a business group work together harder, put more blood, sweat, and tears into something that wasn't their own. This isn't ours. All of the money that comes from this goes right back into our community. There is not a paid position that runs this concert venue. Nobody is paid. This is all volunteer. We do the setup, we do the teardown, we do everything. But when I talk about data, yeah, we did not sell as many tickets as we had hoped. We still haven't sold as many tickets as we have hoped. Does that mean it's a failure? Maybe if you're looking at data. But that's not always what it's about, right? So the memories that were made, the feeling, the community support, the projects coming forward, what the community is capable of. The fact that it brought together two generations and the older generation completely connected with the younger generation, and that gap was brought smaller. That's something we couldn't create with Ice Cream Sunday. I mean, yes, that was amazing, but you can't create that connection. Since then, we've had a few other concerts. It's a great family venue. That person up in the top corner is Lori McNeil. She works at our pharmacy. She owns our pharmacy. Everybody just continues to work. Down below, you'll see one of the bands playing, people just dancing. It is an amazing outdoor venue, and I'm not just saying that. It's built on a hill. It was literally built so that the sound just kept going. And we did find a niche. We were not expecting to find this niche. We're actually a pretty amazing rock venue. We had no idea that rock music was going to be so popular for an outdoor venue, but it turns out in small towns, it's hard to find a spot where you can have rock music because of the volume. Our volume circulates. So we're able to keep it kind of where it's at. And we're able to get the licenses that we need because beer does help, right? So we did find that when we're not having those family-friendly concerts, that a beer concert, I mean, not a beer, but a rock concert with a beer tent goes really well. And let me tell you, beer helps pay bills. So if you're ever having a hard time paying for an event, add beer. Just say it. That is all I have, but I just feel bad that I'm leaving you with add beer. But yeah, have a good one.
All right, so hello again, everyone. My name is Kirk Rea from the City Repair Project in Portland, Oregon. I've seen Portland mentioned a few times in some of the presentations, the conversations, and most definitely there's a lot of placemaking happening in Portland. You know, throw a rock, drop something, it'll be bound to fall on a placemaking project. So City Repair is but a node of this movement that is going on in Portland. Dozens and dozens of communities from doing work from a block scale to the Bureau of Transportation shutting down roads and tens of thousands of bikers coming out for an open street event. And I'd like to start my presentation by sharing a project that City Repair did not do, but an amazing project, and also to honor the indigenous folks of Portland. So the land that I live on is originally the land of the Clackamas, the Multnomah, and the Chinook tribes, and other tribes named and unnamed. And communities, and there are native communities still active in the Northwest and in Portland. And a recent project is called the Cully Park Intertribal Gathering Garden, and the native communities were able to find some land on a public park to be able to plant, grow, and then harvest plants that are traditional foods, medicine, craft, and just an amazing project to see a collaboration from the neighborhood level to city to county. And a big precedent set here was normally we're not able to harvest from public land, liability issues, or how do we share in the commons. And so this feat was also changing the law to be able to harvest from the land, you know, that has been their land, and this will help preserve tradition, preserve culture. So City Repair, we look at space and whether it has story or a lack thereof. And in the right-of-way, in our public zones, there's not always an abundance of story. And so if you ask the Google mind, what does an intersection look like? These are images that may pop to the top. And we like to look at streets and intersections because they're such an abundant public space and accessible. So some pretty less functions. You know, streets are predominantly very car-oriented, and that's the main focus. And then if you ask the Google brain what Portland intersections look like, you'll see dozens of images of murals with benches and gardens and sculptures, poetry posts, community bulletin boards. There's a 24-hour self-service solar-powered tea station at one site. And so we have about 70 what we call intersection repair, these street paintings, and about 700 projects total in Portland. And to get to this point, you know, earlier I talked about getting access from the city to be able to do this. But when it comes to a community moving forward, what the permit looks like to be able to do a street painting is for the residents that are living adjacent to the street paintings, there has to be 100% consensus to get the permit. And then additionally, there has to be 80% consensus within a 2-block radius of the installation, which can be a lot of community organizing. It can be a lot of work, but for us, it is the proper thing to do because by ensuring community consent, that means there's an authentic presence coming out that the folks inhabiting that zone want to see. So this is the first intersection painting. In the panel I mentioned that it was breaking the law. when it comes to maintaining community consent, an interesting thing is that as communities install this in their neighborhoods, some may repaint the same painting year to year, and that doesn't require a new permit. They just have to get a block party permit, but not that original getting all the consensus. More blank page. But what you would be seeing here is what that first intersection looks like now. In that community, they elect to every year do a new painting. And by doing a new design, they have to go to that original permitting process. So they have to get everyone together, build the design, and make sure that there's the 100% adjacent and the 80% within a 2-block radius. So every year that there's some communities that are redoing that process, which is great because for them it's the programming for their placemaking installation. It's getting back together, having potlucks, exchanging ideas, and then at the very least coming back together again to repaint the street, to maybe add a new garden bed or a new community installation. Let's see, what can I show you? And while we've had a lot of success, moving from 20 years ago, there's definitely divisive issues and hard spots. And one type of project that we try to give a lot of energy to is supporting houseless communities that want to develop villages and creating temporary shelter, and basically building tiny homes. And much like our first intersection paintings, some of these projects were kind of breaking the law. The first houseless village that went in Portland, called Dignity Village, kind of started without getting permission, and then has been successful and has grown to allow more and more villages to be accepted by the city and by different communities, but it's still an edge. And so I have one image I can give you. So the tiny homes you're seeing here is a place called the Kenton's Women's Village. And for most of the villages that had been created for houseless folk have often been in not the most desirable location, and have often taken years to be able to get access to land to land on. But it's been, like I mentioned, more and more accepted as a way of helping create shelter. And so we identified a neighborhood in Portland that there was some land that the city could give, and we did as much outreach, as much information sessions, input sessions as possible, going door to door to inform, get input from the residents, because we've definitely seen failures in trying to find land in different neighborhoods in Portland. Another tactic we used was getting major architecture firms on board with the project, getting 14 different firms to each build or design and then build a different, what we call sleeping pods, which is what you see in the image. And by starting with permission from the city, by having a lot of partners like these major architecture firms, that helped the neighborhood community feel a lot better about this type of project going into their neighborhood with all the capacity and with all the diverse partners that we had in on this project. And also showing the beauty that these places could be. A lot of these villages are filled with art and plants, gardens. Knowing that beauty is a key component of feasibility, so that folks in the neighborhood appreciate what's going into the neighborhood. but also so that the residents of the villages can placemake for themselves and have a wonderful place to live in. Like I mentioned, the first village name is Dignity Village. We have Right to Dream Village. And so, through all the information gathering, all these partnerships, when the neighborhood association voted on whether or not to allow the Kenton Women's Village, they voted 2 in favor to 1 to let it go in. Most recently, so that was 2 years ago, and then the neighborhood came up for another vote on whether to extend the stay of the project. And at this point, there's still been relationship building and informing. And with all that taken into account, at this point, there's only a handful of no's out of the entire neighborhood association that voted on it. And I rarely see perceptions change, but I did meet folks in the neighborhood who said originally they were against the project, but because of all the care and the amount of informing and input that went into this, their minds did change on this divisive issue of shelter for houseless folk. And I'll end by saying it's been great to hear questions and have conversation around the equity and inclusion component of placemaking here at the conference so far. And while there's a lot of placemaking going on in Portland, that's also a hard space and something that I would not say is successful in Portland. But there's good work on it. And then another difficulty to name is there's the beauty of placemaking, of being able to put our stamp in the place in which we inhabit, to have our culture, to have our stories out and told, and to feel the benefit of influencing the place in which we inhabit. But sometimes that's not always the most safe thing. So in this image, we see a painting that was installed as a part of a Habitat for Humanity set of homes that they were building, so kind of a small neighborhood. And as a part of the process of getting the families in and kind of hitting the wine bottle of, yay, we did it, everyone's here now, they wanted to do a street painting to kind of act as a beacon and bring more vitality to this neighborhood that they just developed in. And through the placemaking project, well, first I should say, a lot of the folks that were moving into the homes were immigrants, many folks from Africa and visibly Muslim. And at one point through the placemaking process, in the neighborhood close to this painting, before it was put down, someone spray painted, "ISIS, go home." And so, and we of course know that other immigrant communities face other difficulties around perceptions of them being here. So placemaking, being visible, is that always the best option? And we've seen some communities that they don't want to engage in that because of the difficulty of being very visible. And I'm glad that this community went forward and painted, and I hope that person who spray painted "ISIS go home takes a look back and say, ISIS is painting rainbows and mountains and sunshine and flowers now. Something must have changed. But yeah, a lot of work to do and a lot of questions, and I will end with that. Thank you for having me.
Hello? Cool. Hi, good afternoon. I'm super excited to be here. My name is Josh Bajungan. Thank you to the Arts Council, and thank you to you all for sticking it out all day. It's sort of tough being the last one to present after a day of amazing conversations and knowledge sharing. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, where I work as an architect and designer. I have a background focus in neighborhood-based planning and development. When I'm not at that grind, you can find me around the greater Detroit area playing and performing music, actually. Usually when I'm on stage, I have a clunky guitar and I'm tripping over chords. So this is a bit strange. And when I'm with my bands and other musicians, it's our goal to write good music, interesting, compelling compositions. We're in time and key. We're hitting the bridge at the right time. Why do we spend time writing music that we just feel okay about and not excited to share with the masses? So why is it different with the built environment? It's my belief that good design is a social justice issue. We all deserve to have quality housing opportunities, and every child deserves to learn and be educated in well-designed environments. So I work at the Detroit Collaborative Design Center. We are based within the School of Architecture at the University of Detroit Mercy, and we're a staff of 8 full-time professionals, architects, planners, and landscape architects. We're essentially equivalent to what a teaching hospital is to a medical school. We have a consistent staff of 3 to 4 student interns that work alongside us in communities, doing the work there with us, so they're able to learn what it means to be a designer invested in social justice issues. The Design Center shares the same belief as I do about good design. And so I have a diagram I want to help illustrate this concept. The triangle on the left facing up represents economic mobility. The top point is the 1%, and at the bottom is the 99th percentile. To the right, the inverse is design. 99% of design is traditionally reserved for the 1%, and then 1% of the design is reserved for the rest of us that can't afford to make it to the top. We don't see this as just, and we don't see it as right. So it's our goal then to amplify the voices of communities that have a voice but have been diminished by different power structures. So in Detroit, placemaking is a term that can scare a lot of people. There's a lot of growth happening, and it's happening quickly. People are scared of gentrification and what it means for people to come in and make place. So it tends to be sort of a term, it can tend to be a little bit jargony. So before we put descriptors on placemaking, let's bracket creative out and talk about place. We see place as the phenomenon that happens when you take a space and it becomes personal to you. For instance, the Lansing Center was just a conference center to me. I don't know much about Lansing. It didn't become personal to me until I came here and got up on this stage and participated in conversations with you all today. Like in similar ways, a table in a big green grassy area is just a table. But when I invite you there to have a picnic with me, hot cider and donuts, that becomes the place you get to hang out with me. And I get to hang out with you. And making, we understand, is the act of being hands-on and bringing something to life. So we'd like to separate those two things before we come to understand them and talk about them in creative or tactical ways. I'm not going to talk about these images just yet, but I want you to keep note that there are lowriders and breakdancers. So I'm going to bring this to Southwest Detroit, where I'm going to show you a series of projects to help talk about these philosophies. This is the Alley Project in Springwells. Springwells in the Southwest Detroit community is majority Hispanic and Latin American. The Alley Project was conceived out of this idea that you can't import culture or define culture in a community when you're coming into this community that exists. You can work to amplify it by observing and understanding, involving, and then synthesizing what you find and amplifying it with those who have been there all along. So Young Nation is the nonprofit organization that came up with the Alley Project, and the goal was to amplify the things that were self-determined by the community and about the community. So street art, not necessarily having to equal graffiti and vandalism, and lowrider culture being a positive hobby, similar like just to mechanical work rather than something that signified gang life. It also looked inwards towards the alley as a third space between single-family homes that could be recaptured and used to celebrate community and the act of being together with the vehicle of street art. So the left image, you're looking down a formerly vacant lot, which is now literally everything in that image is a canvas for street art. And as you move back, you arrive at the yellow garage, which is a detached garage. When it opens up, it becomes a studio classroom for workshops about street art. I'm not going to talk too much about maps, but I just want to point out that the gray shaded area that's highlighted is the alleyways. We don't even really address the streets because we're looking inward, and it's about that togetherness in an intimate setting. So here is the alley as it stood before the alley project. You can see there's some artwork, but there's also a bunch of garbage and dumping issues. It's really a diminished voice in the community, although it's a space that people enjoy and share. So we can start to bring this to life and amplify what is there, adding people, wayfinding, and then bringing it to life. So now it's become a place to practice street art, to learn about it, and to look cool and tough with your friends, too. So there's all these detached garages on the alley, and as this project gained momentum, other neighbors began donating the facade of their garages as more canvases to the cause. And so we started employing wayfinding techniques to show how this back corridor was, how to move throughout it, how to find your way through it. And on the right, you can see a community stakeholder, Mary Luevanos, in the back, working with kids doing an art project. They actually dedicated the studio to her because she's been a longstanding community member, very dear to this project. And again, a young girl painting, and then the canvas you see on the right does not look like that today. It won't look like it does today tomorrow. It's always changing. So that project was the catalyst that the neighborhood and community needed it to be and what they wanted it to be. And it's had a magnificent snowball effect. This street that kind of goes off to the right is Ellesmere, and it bisects the alley project. The building you see on the left is before and after on the right. So before, it's sort of a diminished space in the built environment. It's acting as a canvas for street art, but not doing much else. So Young Nation, growing with the Tap Gallery, is now known as Inside Southwest Detroit. They're doing a lot more programming and have a far greater reach, so they were able to redevelop this building. They invited the design center in to do a participatory design process. On the left, you can see us engaging with community members, figuring out what the design intentions are for this building, what it will be, and how it will be about this community. On the right, you can see us at the building celebrating the findings of this collaborative design process. So again, before, you can see the street art is there, and then after, the street art is still there. It's still a canvas, but it's amplified, if you will. It's a place where the community can go to hone in their art forms. I think right now there's a photography studio in there, and there's a community gathering space and event space, as well as the offices for the nonprofit. So as this was going on, this project just had its grand opening last month, and the Tap Gallery opened in 2011. So as these things are happening over time, there's other catalyst projects bubbling up. So I'm going to sort of paint a constellation of these other projects. These are design workshop images. We worked with the Urban Neighborhood Initiative. They work from early childhood development to adolescent youth, doing after-school programming and events in the summer. The organization has a building that's underutilized. They want to renovate it and move all their adolescent youth programming into this space. So we engaged with the Youth Advisory Board. It's teenagers all in high school that have a knack for leadership. So we tapped them to lead a design workshop, and we were there to serve as their backup. On the left image, you can see this guy, Daniel. He's talking about the potential for this space. Is it going to be arts-based? Is it going to be fitness-based? A bookstore or study hall? Talking through those ideas and seeing what his peers liked. In the middle, Diana is looking at a map, and it's showing the walkable radius in their community. What exists? What restaurants do they go to? Where's the karaoke place? Where do they get ice cream or hang out after school? And then what's not there? They don't have a boxing gym. They don't have a place where they like to play video games together with in the community. So we were mapping and identifying gaps. On the right, you can see the group of about 30 peers participating. We held the workshop in the space that was going to become theirs, so we were able to do some fun things. We had a scavenger hunt to help them learn about the space, get a little bit more personal with it. Then we had a painting exercise where we gave them round canvases that they could paint drawings or write words that described how the space would become personal to them, and we had them place the canvases where they thought an activity would go. I think the one on the right says boxing gym, and it was placed somewhere where they thought a boxing gym may go. So the lowriders and breakdancers, that was all happening in this vacant parking lot, or this parking lot. It may appear as, like an underutilized space, but it is the place of the blessing of the lowriders, an annual event that celebrates lowrider culture and street dancing. It also is the bookend to the Alley Project Gallery. The building you see with the mural is owned by Grace in Action, a nonprofit we're working with. They're faith-based, but they have a collective of social entrepreneurs housed within. They have the Equitable Internet Initiative, which brings high-speed internet at affordable rates to the neighborhood. They have a screen printing company that does workshops teaching the art of screen printing. And there's a music studio, and then a business that teaches programming and coding to youth and adults who didn't have access to learn these skills. So we're working with them. We're going to have a design workshop in about 2 weeks to reimagine this parking lot and the parking lot on the other side of the building as public plazas. We want to amplify the culture, these things about the Tap Gallery and the Spring Mills neighborhood in a way that is more dignified than a parking lot. Okay, this is the last project I will share with you. This is the neighborhood office and incubator space. It's about a mile and a half away from all the other projects, but the organization that is opening this is very much connected with those organizations. It's operated by Garaje Cultural, a Latin American arts and culture organization. They also have the Motor City Street Dance Academy within here. They're opening a cafe, co-working space, community living room, and a small business incubator. It's filling a lot of gaps. There's not really the coffee shop. The one that they had was closed, priced out of the neighborhood, and it's just building on this snowball effect of spaces that are for the Latin American community and centered around the arts and the culture. So again, the collaborative design process, sharing ideas, determining design intentions, determining what the vibe of the space will look like, talking about precedent studies, what materials are we using, what are the core principles to the design. And I'll leave you with a artistic rendering that we did at the Design Center that illustrates all of these ideas. A community living room space on the left. On the right, you have the cafe moving back into the space, and the block in the center has co-working up in the loft, a community meeting space in the bottom, and some small retail spaces. So you can see the cluster, just a couple maps to show you in space. You can see the cluster around the Tap Gallery in the bottom, and then noise is kind of off on its own, but there's a lot more happening all around. So I just want to close with these two images that will hopefully tie it all together. On the left, these young girls are reinventing the space intended for bike parking. I don't know if they can ride bikes yet, but they're definitely reinventing this space as a place for play. It's really important. That's at the Tap Gallery. And on the right, you can see Mary Levinos, that key stakeholder at the Tap Gallery, passing on art and knowledge to a younger generation. This woman didn't grow up with spaces in this neighborhood where she could practice her art in a way that didn't appear as vandalism. Thank you.
It's been an amazing day. I think we've all learned from each other, and we've shared a lot of our stories with each other. And I hope you feel as empowered to go back to your daily work. Some of you have already gone back to your daily work, but find ways to use creative placemaking and to use this movement here in Lansing. But I want to thank first and foremost Chris Fair for coming into Lansing and being a part of our morning. A lot of great stuff was shared. We're very thankful that you're out there doing our data work for us, so keep that up. And then I just want to thank the other speakers and our sponsors and for all of you for attending this great event. But as much as I think we've accomplished in such a short time, remember, this has been 3 or 4 years that we've really put a real big effort into this. We still have a lot more to accomplish before we really do tip the scales in our favor. And we need everyone. We need you, and we need me, and we need the other guys that aren't here to be working collaboratively to make Greater Lansing into the kind of destination that is world-class. It's highlighting our assets and remembering, and I'll go back to Scrap Fest, remembering where we came from, and allowing us to move into the future as creatively and artistically as we possibly can. I would like to say one more thank you to our title sponsor, the Greater Lansing Regional Prosperity Initiative. Thank you for stepping forward many years ago and being a part of this whole process with us. We couldn't do it without you, so thank you. And then I would be remiss if I didn't thank the Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs and the National Endowment for the Arts that put a lot of our resources into play to make sure that the Arts Council can actually do this kind of an event and put you in a room together to have these conversations. So mark your calendars for next year. We're coming back to the Lansing Center on September 26th in 2019, and we plan to remind you often and at least yearly that art, culture, and creativity is the driving force for thriving and dynamic for this region. Quick reminder that this is for the city of Lansing. There is $75,000 available for an arts impact project, and the presentations for that are going to take place on Monday, October 29th from 4:30 to 6:30 at Micah Gallery. So if you're looking for $75,000, figure out what your project is, where you're going to put it, why it's important to put it there, what impact is it going to make on the city of Lansing, and attend that event. You can find more information at our website. So if there is one thing about this event that we want you to do is to build new relationships, make new connections, and find others that you can actually entice to do more projects in our communities. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for being here today and sharing this with us. We'll see you next year.